Listen, not everybody in the room knows or knew Gloriana Locklear, deceased now for 6 years. But if you will walk through our building, and if you'll pay attention to the doors, you'll notice that back here is a door. Down here on the right, there's a nice big scar that's just ripped right across the door. Now, Gloriana Locklear was wheelchair bound, an electric wheelchair, and oftentimes when she would get her stuff worked up, and I'm going to say this, I love Gloriana Locklear dearly. I ended up being, by surprise, executor of her estate and dealing with all of her personal matters after she died. But the woman had a good head of temper on her with some regularity. And when her temper got worked up, when anger was with her, she would oftentimes barrel through this building, wheelchair, full force forward ahead, and she'd run into things. She'd run into the door here, if you'll check the minister's door to my office, if you'll check the dishwasher in the kitchen. Big, wonderful scars running right down them where Gloriana Locklear plowed into them, oftentimes in anger. Now she was, as you heard from her autobiographical account, of a challenged background. She knew full well how it is that anger is grounded always in fear and hurt. Such had been her childhood experience in significant part. But she, true to the potential of this faith of ours, and true to the hope that all good people of liberal religious perspective share with one another, she understood always that if she could call herself back to the wisdom of Thich Nhat Hanh and others, to realize that in her moment of anger it was about her, not the other person, then she had these profound moments of spiritual enlightenment and uplift. The most wonderful of which, and I know many of you have heard this before, but I have to tell it to you again on my next to last Sunday in Greensboro. It's 6 months or so before she dies. She's down in the intensive care unit at Moses Cone. By this point in time, with no family, she's asked me to be her medical family, and I'm called in for all of her consults with her specialist. The doctor gets me in the room with her, and the doctor says, this woman is going to die soon. She's too obese, she's not getting any exercise, all of her organs are shutting down on her. You've got to get her, and he was very emphatic and used profane language, you've got to get her ass out of the bed and begin to move. And then he pointed at Gloriana Locklear and said, I want you to do 2 miles a day. Gloriana screamed, told him to get out of her room. She'd never seen such a quack before in her whole life. She survives. We get home. She gets home, and I go to visit. And true to my call, I have to keep bringing her back to the hard news that was shared in the hospital about the 2 miles a day. Gloriana chews me out one day after another. Get out of here. This is not what I need from a minister. I need a minister to tell me I am loved. But don't be telling me to get up and walk 2 miles. So I bring some colleagues in the community in on the challenge that's before Gloriana. I call some women and I go, can you please help me get Gloriana to get up and get some exercise so that she can hold on to this precious life with which we all share. And the all-time best was Tish Gunn. Tish Gunn, if you would stand. Tish Gunn, who oftentimes has helped me through my 10-year tenure here in ministering to people. Tish goes to see Gloriana, and Gloriana chews her out, Tish trying to get her up to go walking. So Tish goes home, thinks about it for a while, calls Gloriana and says, Gloriana, why don't you come to the YWCA with me and go swimming 2 or 3 times a week? Gloriana hits the roof again. She doesn't want to be told to exercise, she just wants to be told that she can be loved. About a week after that, my phone rings here in the office, and it is Gloriana Locklear, and she says, are you there? And I said, yes, and she says, don't move! So I sit here, and about 10 minutes later, in blows Gloriana Locklear in that wheelchair of hers, and she's coming at me hard. She comes barreling down to my office, barrels into it, and she says, do you know that fool Tish Gunn wants me to do cow pond aerobics? And I said, what are you talking about, Gloriana? And she says, that fool Tish Gunn found me a pond to go swimming in and wants me to go swimming in the pond. The pond because Gloriana had said she couldn't go in the swimming pool because she was allergic to chlorine. angry at me as she's ever been. And she held on to that anger for a good long while. She would roll past me and mutter, "Cow pond aerobics." But about 4 weeks before she died, at the beginning of the summer of 2005, visiting with Gloriana Locklear again, Gloriana Locklear went back to that childhood pain. And in her reflective work about the childhood pain, she also remembered how it was that in her moment of spiritual clarity, she could get that what Tish Gunn had been about in her ministry to her was not intended to slap her upside the head, but rather to tell her that she was loved. And she sat with me. Gloriana had deep, and Mary Margaret, I see your love for Gloriana still. This would eat Gloriana up because she would feel terrible guilt for the pain that she inflicted on others out of her anger, and she would want to do something to redeem herself in that moment of spiritual awareness. I want y'all to remember that story, because no congregation, no matter how good it is, and you are a wonderful congregation, no matter how good the congregation, the stuff of anger is always part and parcel of the human movement towards the better world. You don't get there with easy peace and justice. You get there with painful peace and justice. And it is critical that a congregation remember that the markers of anger are opportunities not for us, as Thich Nhat Hanh put it, to go burn down someone else's house, but rather to tend to the burning of our own, the stuff that's within. I want to close this morning with a recounting of a story from Anne Lamott. And all of you can go find this story. It's in her book, Grace Eventually. I'm going to retell it and read just one tiny piece of it. But it is an account of Anne Lamott's challenges as a church woman. It's an account I love. It's from a story entitled The Carpet Guy. The Carpet Guy. Anne Lamott out in Marin County, California one morning, looking for a carpet to put down on the floor of the Sunday school room in which she teaches little children, sees off on the side of the road a beautiful seafoam green carpet. So she goes barreling off to the side of the road, walks into this ratty store, asks the guy if she can buy the carpet. He says, sure, it's 50 bucks. She gives him 50 bucks cash, throws the seafoam green carpet in the back of her car and carries it over to the church. Throws it into the Sunday school room where she teaches, calls the woman that she teaches with and says, I got us that carpet we've been looking for. I won't be there this next Sunday, but you put it down and y'all have great fun with it. It's a gift from me. Following Monday morning, Anne's phone rings. It's the woman she teaches with. She says, I unrolled that carpet and it had mold all over the inside of it. So Anne Lamott says, oh, well, I'll come pick it up and I'll take it back to the guy I bought it from and get us a refund. So Anne Lamott goes and does that. And the guy looks at her and says, your receipt? And Anne Lamott says, oh, I'm sorry, I don't have it with me. And the guy says, well, no receipt, no refund. So Anne goes, finds the receipt, carries it to the woman she co-teaches with, and supposedly the guy's going to give the co-teacher the money back. So she goes and calls the co-teacher, and the co-teacher says, took the receipt in but didn't get the money back. Anne goes down to the carpet store. The guy tells her, no receipt, no money back. He already has the receipt from the woman that she's been teaching with. Anne feels anger rising up in her. And she begins to call him Buddy. And she writes in this story of how all of her self-righteousness, good religious woman that she is, good Sunday school teacher that she is, of asthmatic children, this guy's going to have hell to pay if he doesn't give her the money back. He doesn't do it. So Anne leaves the store profoundly upset and goes to the biggest, tallest, darkest, meanest male member of the congregation that she can find and says to Brian, his name, I need for you to go lean on that carpet store guy for me to get my money back for our Sunday school for our poor little asthmatic children. So Brian goes and does that, and Anne is anxious to have the call from him saying, I got you $50 back. She doesn't hear from him for a half an hour. She doesn't hear from him for an hour. So she finally picks up the phone and calls him, and lo and behold, guess what Brian is? Brian is full of rage because the guy has staved him off and told him that he can go hit the road because there's nothing to be had. So she goes back one last time, and all the stops are out, and she writes of the humiliation that she feels, good churchwoman that she is, walking into the store, and she knows that she is going to be profane, she is going to be arrogant, she is going to be her most venomous self, she's going to wipe the floor with the schmuck, and he has a friend in there with him. She goes in and she says, he looks at the friend and does this. And she says, that just puts her into outer orbit. And so she screams and yells and screams and yells. And lo and behold, the guy writes a check for $50 and hands it to her. So she storms out of the store, goes over to the bank. The teller tells her, the guy didn't put your name in here, you're going to have to write it in. And here's where I pick the story up. He wrote a check for $50, leaving the pay to the order of blank, and handed it to me. Thank you, I said grimly. I headed for the bank, which is a couple of blocks away. I filled in my name, endorsed the check, and handed it to the teller. A moment later, she said, oh, I'm sorry. There are insufficient funds. Catch this, though. Here's Anne Lamott. I finally laughed. I finally laughed into my chest quietly. It's okay, I said. I took the check and turned away. If you had seen me, you'd have thought she had just given me $100 for being so nice about the whole thing. I sat outside the bank for a while. Look, I said to God, it's to you, pal. You copy that? Then I sat in the sun and kept starting to laugh. I felt deep inside that I'd gotten it, though I could not quite have said what I'd gotten. I didn't get the delicious taste of release I'd been expecting when a wrong has been righted, but I got something better, a kind of miracle. I stopped hating myself. The carpet guy had cheated me, but he was also an innocent bystander in a very old story. He was the ledger inside of me every time I'd been humiliated and stifled. When I said to God, the eagle has landed, now what am I supposed to do? After a few minutes, I knew. I got the nudge in my heart to go to the Safeway near the rug store and buy a bouquet of daisies for the carpet man. One has a moral and spiritual obligation to clean up one side of the street. I wrote him a note. Here is your check back. I am very sorry for the way I behaved. Anne. The carpet store was locked, but the dim lights were on. I knocked softly when no one opened the door. I laid the daisies, tied the daisies to the doorknob, and with the metal twist tie that held them, and dropped the check and my note through the mail slot. Maybe this was what Ecclesiastes meant about casting your bread upon the water. It's so little, usually only crumbs, but how nourishing the casting is. And then I went back home. I called the carpet store from my kitchen at 5, but for no reason, I recognized the man's voice when he answered. Hi, I said, this is Anne Lamott. There was a silence, loud and dark. I got your letter, he said. That was a decent thing. And just as I was beginning to savor his words, he added, but you behaved badly. She goes on to write how I had behaved badly, and all of her anger comes back up in her. But this time she remembers that it's about her and her hurts and her ledger sheet and her fear and her pain. And so she is more quickly able to let it go in this final rendering of the anger with the carpet guy. The stuff of church in all of its manifestations is always full of the potential for us to have the misunderstandings and the mishaps and the miscommunications and the wrongs and the lacks of reasons that cause these feelings to well up in us. My hope in this closing sermon on anger is that all of us will do much into the future to remember the wisdom of Gloriana Locklear as well as Anne Lamott in all that we are as a people full of hope, promise, great joy, and love, but also carrying with us the mark of anger, which is of our great shared humanity. May we ever be a people of hope and promise in all that we are. Amen.